Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And welcome back to our Dark Side of the Ring Season 1 recap show. This time we're talking about Episode 3, The Killing of Bruiser Brody. Which, given that Mick Foley at the very end of it said something like, join us this season as we take on more Dark Side. I wonder if this was the first one they actually produced and they just ended up airing it third.
That's a good question.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I was just sounded like I just watched it this morning, and he said that at the end. And I was like, I wonder if they did this first. I'm always fascinated by that. They did that in Star Trek Next Generation. Some of the episodes are out of order. Anyways, so yeah, I thought this was a really solid episode. It was kind of hard to watch, just because it was, I was going to say gut wrenching, but that feels like inappropriate for this episode. Tony Atlas's account of the incident, especially, and how the juxtaposition of this, huge, larger-than-life guy being fairly helpless in trying to, A, help his friend, and B, help avenge him or see justice through for him, and not being able to, was pretty heartbreaking. But it was also an interesting portrait of the man, Frank Goodich, as well.
Indeed. And this story has been told several times. The story of Invader Number One asking Brody to come into the shower to have a talk, and then in the course of that conversation, Brody was stabbed, and according to Totally Atlas, that more stabbing was attempted after they made their way out of the shower. He was involved in breaking that up. And while the kind of the basic story beats of that narrative are pretty well known, prior to watching this, I wasn't aware that Brody had bought a portion of the company. I wasn't aware that the promotion owed him a pretty sizable chunk of money. And I guess I wasn't completely aware of the history between himself and Invader Number One. They had beef prior to that incident that went back about 10 years, where Invader Number One, Jose Gonzalez, was in the midst of getting some sort of push potentially, and Bruiser Brody just apparently beat the heck out of him in a match.
Yeah,
then,
we had always heard stories about the Puerto Rico territory, World Wrestling Council, and how, for lack of a better word, crazy it was. The fans are like super into it, and they'll riot. And some of the wrestling there is just, can get pretty gruesome. Some of the footage I hadn't seen before. Like, obviously we had seen the footage of, was it Invader 3?
And Manny Fernandez. Yeah.
And Manny Fernandez, when he did the blood stuff. But the match, footage that they showed of Bruiser Brody versus Manuel, I forget the rest of it. Yeah. Oh my God, that was rough. There was some really, really rough stuff going on there. But as Dutch Mantell tells it, that's how we got people to think that it was the real deal, because we just made it. It was like really, really violent down there, and that's why it was successful. So yeah, like you said, the story. I through various shoot interviews, other avenues, I had heard the story before. When Dutch Mantell sort of tries to put the pieces together in terms of motivation for Invader to stab Bruiser Brody, and he notes, he had just lost his 3-year-old child in a swimming pool accident, and there was the incident, like you said, 10 years earlier when he was looking to get noticed by the WWF, and then they had that match with Bruiser Brody, and Bruiser Brody just beat the shit out of him. And then on top of that, I didn't know that the idea that Brody was trying to, well, you said this, that was he was trying to buy a piece of the prop of the promotion, and he was wanting to make some changes, including, de-pushing, if you will, Invader.
Invader was the booker, and I guess he wanted to fire him from that position.
Yeah, exactly. And so, all that stuff put together was, obviously is some cause for motivation. I think that, this the story that Tony Atlas has to tell, though, to me was by far. I mean, he was obviously the only actual eyewitness beyond Carlos Colon, or was Carlos? Yeah, he just came in and then like told Invader to stop. But Tony Atlas was there. Yeah, I hadn't heard the bit about him bringing the knife back down and then it chopping off his ponytail. I hadn't heard that before. And then little details like, Bruiser Brody grabbing onto his son's picture throughout the entire thing. Like he walked into there with his son's picture because he happened to be looking at it and he never put it down even during surgery. All that stuff is like super. You see this as they talk about it, you sort of see it play out. And it's like, man, so many ways, so many times along the way, this guy could have made it. He could have lived.
Yeah. Exactly,
and whether it took 45 minutes for the ambulance to get there. The doctors were like, oh, no, we'll take care of him when we can. And Atlas was like, no, you're going to do it now.
And literally grabbed the doctor and carried him over to Brody, yeah.
All the hemming and hawing of that, the fact that, the trial was completely and totally rigged to let Jose Gonzalez off the hook. And he's still alive today, by the way. He's booking children's birthday parties, apparently, as a luchador. So yeah, it's a pretty heart-wrenching, eye-opening tale.
It is. And one interesting aspect of it is Dutch Mantell talks about how, as you mentioned earlier, it was wrestling in the World Wrestling Council is presented as extremely violent to make it seem real.
Yeah.
And one of the difficulties, apparently, in the early stages of the investigation is that the police thought, oh, this is an angle, essentially, they're running. Because, they didn't really take anything seriously, seemingly until Tony Atlas returned to the venue from the hospital and was like, no, Invader did it. And then even subsequently, I don't know, I haven't read any firsthand accounts of the trial itself, but the implication that Dutch laid out there essentially was that people believed in Bruiser Brody, the character, so much as being a madman.
Yeah.
That it would make sense for Bruiser Brody, the character, to potentially threaten Invader number one, and then Invader having to defend himself.
Yeah. I mean,
and since no one knows what was said in the shower, no one knows what exchange was had between the two of them. So we don't know what exactly led up to the stabbing. We just know that Bruiser Brody was stabbed twice, two 8-inch wounds. One which apparently in the lower abdomen, and then another. I meant the same one that
was further up. Yeah,
but I think the one that in the abdomen was the one that cut his liver.
Cut his liver, yeah.
Which that was the wound. I mean, they managed to sew him back up, but the wound to the liver, which was the one that seemed like the doctors were more worried about.
Yeah. The early bits about Frank Goodrich, Bruiser Brody, the man. Were very interesting to me when they showed footage from a shoot interview where he was an incredibly articulate person. I mean, this guy really did. Like when they show footage of him and then they show footage of him talking, I mean, talk about like goals to be just a human being. Like he looked at me because when Lacey was watching with me, she was like, he looks like Jason Momoa. And I was like, God, could you imagine Jason Momoa would be perfect to play this guy. Because there are you can see some similarities there.
Yeah, definitely.
But when he's
it's
talking,
amazing to see. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say when he's talking about like his his football career to the shoot interview people, and then they had to be like, oh, hold on a second, we were rolling that whole time to make sure that he was like, okay, I just want to make sure that I'm presented as Bruiser Brody, not Frank Goodrich.
Yeah,
he was very careful about that image.
Yes, he was, and that extended beyond just the interview set, extended to his business dealings in total. One thing about him though is I don't think this is necessarily uncommon in wrestling, but to see it on full display where, during that interview they showed where he's talking about his football career, incredibly soft spoken.
Yeah.
He seemed, he has these massive scars all over his forehead from blading. But he seems mild-mannered, soft-spoken, and his wife details where she would drop him off at the airport, and he'd have his hair pulled back, and he was dad to his son and husband to his wife. And as soon as he got out of the car and started walking through the door of the airport, he took the, he let his hair down, and as he was walking, the transformation began from Frank Goodich to Bruiser Brody, because once he was out in public, I imagine he felt it was his responsibility to be Bruiser Brody.
Yeah.
And to keep that character intact whenever he's in the public sphere.
Could you imagine having to tell, because we hear all sorts of stories about, how wrestlers, especially back then, even more so than now, were on the road always. And, his wife, his widow now, said, he told me up front, I'm going to be home 3 months a year. And they got married and had a kid. And they make it work, but I couldn't imagine that life. I couldn't imagine seeing my family 3 months out of the year.
And you compare that, I mean, that's not being home a lot. Compare that to Ric Flair, who was home like 7 days out of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. I couldn't.
It's pretty crazy, man.
I don't even know, why would you even have a family in that case? 3 months is one thing. I still couldn't do it. But in the case of Ric Flair, I was just always sort of curious, why did you even have a family? I mean, maybe psychologically it's just hey, even though I'm never there, I know I have an anchor, and that'll reel me in if I get too close to the edge. Maybe it's something like that. It's fascinating to me,
no idea.
With whatever it is.
Yeah.
But Abdullah the Butcher was also interviewed in this. He's an interesting character. And in fact, I'm not even sure. I had to have seen some interviews with him in the past, but I was kind of taken aback by how he talks, and his voice does not fit the persona of him at all. I get what you're saying with Bruiser Brody, but it doesn't look weird when his words come out of his mouth.
No, because he still has the intensity in his eyes,
and he's and he might be soft spoken, but he speaks with the utmost confidence. Bruiser Brody seems like a very confident person when he speaks. He speaks with authority, even if it's soft. Abdullah has the weird, he's got a weird little voice like this. He's got a really weird voice for this big, crazy looking dude. And you also get the idea, at least from Tony Atlas, that he's also not the most truth-telling person in the world.
Yeah, the meeting. Yeah, so apparently the day after Brody was stabbed, this is Tony Atlas said he spent the previous night on the beach because Savio Vega warned him not to go back to his room.
Hey, good guy Savio Vega, huh?
Yeah. So he spent the night on the beach, comes back to the hotel, and there's a meeting that takes place, according to Tony Atlas and Dutch Mantel. They both say there's a meeting where they discuss what happened, and as I mentioned, that's when Atlas learns that Brody has died. But there's some contention between Tony Atlas and Abdullah whether Abdullah was actually there. Tony says yes, he was there, and Abdullah Butcher says no. But while saying no, he makes a point of mentioning that he owned 5% of the company.
Yeah. I mean, he was not. Yeah, it was kind of obvious. It's okay, well, that's a wink and a nod if I ever saw one, Yeah, that stuff was interesting. And then, just the complete and total lack of justice that was ever served. It's horrible. And of course, they say at the end that they attempted to interview. They contacted Carlos Colon and Jose Gonzalez and Vader for a comment, and they never responded.
They declined. Yeah.
Yeah. Not surprisingly, not shockingly at all. But yeah, I mean, I could not imagine when Bruiser Brody's son, now an adult, says, I don't even care about legal justice necessarily. I just want personal justice. It makes me think, all right, man, start bulking up, find a couple of mercenaries and go to Puerto Rico. Because that would be horrible, man. To live with that. Man, that would just be unbelievable. It really would be.
I know, that would be.
That's a shame. I loved when they were digging through the garage and all that old school merch from Japan that they had.
I think Pro Wrestling Tees has, through the Dark Side of the Ring merchandise line, has an old school Bruiser Brody shirt.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out. I know I got one of their designs for Bruiser Brody that I wear every once in a while.
Yeah, it's a cool shirt.
But yeah, no, this was a really good one. What's coming up next? What's next week?
I think it's Von Erich's.
Oh, wow.
I think.
I've only seen the WWE doc.
Yes,
I haven't seen this one.
It is the Von Erich's one. I've seen that one too.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be sad to talk about.
Yeah.
I try to watch, like, Lacey's in the room usually when I watch these, and I'm like, hey, you got to check this out. She's like, they're always so depressing. I'm like, what's the dark side of the ring? And I'm like, and on top of that, it's wrestling. It's just generally kind of doesn't have the brightest history in the world. Anyways, that's it. Let us know what you guys thought in the comments. I'm trying to think if there's any other details or anything that I'm missing, but I think we sort of covered everything.
Yeah, I mean, the Tony Atlas is really the emotional.
Oh, he's the heart and soul of this entire thing. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. And just to hear him relate, what he saw, what he had to do to get Brody some medical attention, what he had to do to maybe keep Brody from getting stabbed even more.
And the worst was when he went back to the locker room and he said, worse than him getting stabbed, worse than anything was going back there and his blood hadn't even dried yet, and people were like patting each other and saying, hey, good match, brother. They were laughing. Everything was just like back to normal. And they're all just having a good old time. And then Invader just comes walking back in, and he had changed his shirt. Oh, man.
He had his gear with him, and he mentioned that he's like, why didn't they just cancel the show?
Yeah.
And he says, well, at that point, he comes back from the hospital because the doctors told him to leave because the doctors thought that he would potentially endanger the medical staff there because he'd already picked up one of the doctors just so Brody could get some care. So he goes and has this match against the Iron Sheik that night. And so apparently Iron Sheik asked Tony, hey, how's Brody doing? And Tony says, well, it's not looking good. It's serious. And at that point, the cover story was that a fan had attacked Bruiser Brody on his way to the locker room. And Iron Sheik made some reference to that. And Tony Atlas says, no, it wasn't a fan. It was Invader. And Iron Sheik was so incensed when he found out that apparently he got up and left the ring in the middle of their match. So Tony Atlas says they wrestled for like a minute or two before Iron Sheik just left.
Yeah. Interesting stuff.
So it's definitely it's an interesting watch, and yeah, as you said, Tony Atlas, it's heart wrenching hearing him tell that story.
He seems like such a gentle soul, like such a big dude. Such an imposing guy, but he seems like just such a gentle soul, I told Lacey I'm going to start using the term brother a lot more. Hey, brother, because he said that incessantly. Brother.
Yeah.
That's what I think. This is a wrestling thing, brother.
It is a wrestler thing, I think.
What's up, brother? So I went on her Instagram on one of her jewelry posts, and I said, that looks great, brother. Then she punched me. Anyways, that's it for the show.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
That's probably appropriate.
Got my own dark side of the ring going on over here. This is the ring right here. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Till next time, we'll talk to you later.
Goodbye.